Most stories from World War II follow familiar lines of tragedy, heroism, and sacrifice. But once in a while, there is a story so strange, so unbelievable, that it almost sounds like fiction. On May 5th, 1945, as the war in Europe was collapsing, American soldiers and German Wehrmacht troops stood side by side on the battlements of a medieval Austrian castle. Together, they fought off a determined force of SS soldiers who were desperate, fanatical, and still loyal to the Nazi cause. It was the only known time in the entire war when Americans and Germans fought as allies, and almost no one today knows the story even happened. The origins of this forgotten battle stretch back to the last chaotic days of the war. It was early May, and Hitler was dead. German cities were in ruins. The Wehrmacht was retreating everywhere, and entire regions of the Third Reich were collapsing into confusion. The SS remained dangerous. Fanatical units refused to surrender and were willing to kill their own people rather than lay down their weapons. In the midst of this chaos sat a small stone fortress tucked away in the Austrian Alps. This was Castle Itter, a 15th century structure located near the town of Worgl. Unlike many castles in Europe, Itter had been turned into a special prison, a place the Nazis used to hold an unusual group of inmates. Inside Castle Itter were some of the most important French political prisoners captured during the war. These were not soldiers or resistance fighters. They were national leaders. The castle held men like former French prime ministers Paul Reynaud and Edouard Daladier, as well as generals, cabinet members, and prominent political figures. Their treatment was better than what the Nazis inflicted on concentration camp prisoners, but they were still captives under SS control. Their presence gave Castle Itter a unique status and made it a potential target for violence in the final days of the war. Many feared that SS troops would kill the prisoners before retreating rather than risk them being freed by Allied forces. By early May, the war was clearly ending, and the SS guards stationed at Castle Itter were growing nervous. Rumors spread that American forces were advancing toward the region. Sensing the danger of capture, the SS guards abandoned the castle on May 4th. They left the French prisoners behind with no protection and no clear idea what would happen next. The French leaders quickly realized they were now in a deadly situation. Without guards or communication, they feared SS units might return at any moment to eliminate them before fleeing deeper into the mountains. The prisoners needed help, and fast. One of the few non-French prisoners in the castle was a Czech resistance fighter named Zvonimir Kukovic, known by the nickname Andre. He volunteered to make the dangerous journey through enemy territory to find American troops. He slipped out of the castle, moving through forests and mountain roads, traveling miles on foot and bicycle across a region still crawling with armed soldiers. Andre eventually reached the American 12th Armored Division and told them about the French prisoners trapped inside Castle Itter. He explained that a determined SS force could return and slaughter everyone inside the walls. Lieutenant John Jack Lee Jr., a 27-year-old American tank officer, immediately stepped forward. Lee had gained a reputation for boldness during the war, and he understood the urgency. He was not ordered to form a rescue mission. He chose to. He took a single Sherman tank and a small group of American soldiers and prepared to head toward the castle. He had no idea who he might encounter on the way or how large an SS force he might face, but he decided to move forward anyway. As Lee and his men traveled toward the town of Worgl, they encountered something they did not expect. German Wehrmacht Major Josef Gangl was in the area with a small group of German soldiers. Gangl had already turned against the Nazi regime. He and his men had been protecting local civilians from SS reprisals and trying to avoid needless bloodshed as the war neared its end. When Gangl learned that American troops were preparing to rescue the French prisoners, he offered his help. He knew that SS forces nearby were unpredictable, heavily armed, and capable of terrible violence, even with defeat at the doorstep. Lee listened, and instead of treating Gangl as an enemy, he agreed to join forces. In that moment, something happened that had never occurred during the entire war. Wehrmacht soldiers and American soldiers formed a temporary alliance. Their common enemy was the SS, and both sides understood that protecting innocent people inside Castle Itter mattered more than anything else. This group of Americans and Germans prepared to move as one unit toward the castle, along with a few local Austrian resistance fighters who had also been resisting the Nazis. The approach to Castle Itter was tense. The group traveled with just one Sherman tank, nicknamed Besotten Jenny, and a handful of fighters. The roads were narrow, twisting, and surrounded by forest. At any turn, they could have been ambushed. Lee knew he was taking a huge risk pushing a tank and a small force into territory where SS units were still active. But he also knew the French prisoners had no time left. The mission had to move forward. Late on May 4th, the group finally reached the castle. The French prisoners were shocked to see American soldiers and German Wehrmacht troops arriving together. Many of the prisoners had been political rivals before the war and had little in common, but the situation forced everyone to rely on each other. The defenders immediately began preparing the castle for a fight. They had limited ammunition, a small number of rifles, and a single tank to hold off a possible SS attack. Some of the French leaders insisted on joining the defense despite their age and physical condition. Men who had once led the nation were now preparing to fight with rifles from castle windows. Tensions rose as personalities clashed, but the reality of the situation forced cooperation. Lee organized defensive positions and placed the Sherman tank near the main gate as the primary gun to repel any assault. With the sun going down and a heavy silence settling over the castle, everyone knew what was coming. SS troops were regrouping nearby, and they were angry, unpredictable, and prepared to fight to the end. If they launched an attack at dawn, the defenders would be outnumbered. They had little ammunition and only a small Allied force. Yet every man inside Castle Itter knew that this was their only chance to survive. The defenders inside Castle Itter spent the night listening for any sound that might reveal how close the enemy was. The castle walls echoed with tension. Some of the French prisoners barely slept, gripping rifles they had not fired in decades. Lieutenant Jack Lee checked the positions of every man and made sure the Sherman tank crew stayed ready. The German soldiers under Major Joseph Gangl understood the danger as well. The SS had not abandoned the region, and everyone expected them to strike at first light. At dawn on May 5th, the first figures appeared in the trees below the castle. They were SS troops, and there were far more of them than expected. Estimates placed their force somewhere between 100 and 200 men. They were armed, aggressive, and determined to recapture or kill the French VIP prisoners before American forces advanced any deeper into Austria. Within minutes, rifle fire and machine gun bursts echoed through the valley. The battle for Castle Itter had begun. The American and German defenders returned fire from windows, battlements, and defensive positions they had set the night before. The single Sherman tank, positioned near the gate, fired into the advancing SS lines, shaking the castle with each explosion. The SS troops fanned out through the forest, using every rock, tree, and slope as cover as they pushed closer to the walls. The defenders knew they were outnumbered, and they expected the SS to bring heavier weapons at any moment. Inside the castle, panic surged as bullets chipped stone and splintered wood. The French prisoners were now fighting for their lives. Some of them had spent their lives in politics, not warfare, yet they fired rifles from windows alongside American soldiers and German Wehrmacht troops. The strange alliance became even more surreal as men who would have been enemies only days earlier worked together to defend the same walls. Every man inside the castle understood that survival depended on absolute cooperation. As the SS pressed forward, their fire intensified. Mortars thudded against the outer walls, shaking dust loose from the ceiling beams. The Sherman tank became a priority target. SS soldiers attempted to disable it, and after a barrage of heavy fire, the tank finally took a direct hit that destroyed its ability to fight. Smoke rose from the vehicle, leaving the defenders with one less powerful weapon. Losing the Sherman was a serious blow to the defense, but no one had time to dwell on it. The SS were getting closer. Major Joseph Gangl moved between positions inside the castle, helping coordinate fire and encouraging the defenders. As he stepped into the open to pull a French prisoner to safety, a sniper shot him. The bullet killed him instantly. His sacrifice only strengthened the resolve of the defenders. Gangl had abandoned the Nazi cause and died protecting civilians. Many locals in the region would later honor him as a hero for turning against tyranny in the final days of the war. With ammunition running low and the SS tightening their noose around the castle, the defenders faced a dire situation. They had held out longer than expected, but they could not sustain the fight much longer. Every man in the castle was exhausted and every shot counted. It became clear that unless reinforcements arrived, the defenders would be overrun. One of the most remarkable moments of the battle came from Jean Baratra, a former French tennis champion held as a prisoner at the castle. Baratra volunteered to slip out of the castle, dodge SS fire, and run across open territory to find American reinforcements. It was a near suicidal mission. The SS had the castle surrounded, and anyone attempting to escape was likely to be shot. Despite the danger, Baratra climbed over the walls, sprinted through the forest, and ran several miles at full speed while dodging gunfire and avoiding patrols. Baratra eventually reached troops from the American 142nd Infantry Regiment. He told them about the desperate situation and that the defenders could not hold much longer. The American soldiers immediately prepared to move toward the castle. For the defenders still inside, every minute felt like an hour as the SS continued their assault. As the firefight raged on, the SS made several attempts to rush the gate. The defenders managed to push them back each time, but the pressure was relentless. Rifle barrels overheated from constant firing. Bullets shattered stone steps and ricocheted down hallways. Several of the French VIPs took up positions side by side, firing into the advancing SS despite their age and inexperience. It was a strange sight. Political rivals and leaders who once debated in Parliament were now fighting shoulder to shoulder. The sound of distant engines finally reached the castle. Reinforcements were coming. American troops from the 142nd Infantry pushed through SS lines and emerged from the trees. The arrival of these fresh soldiers changed the entire battle in an instant. The SS attackers, sensing that they were now outnumbered and outmaneuvered, began to break apart. Many fled into the woods while others were quickly captured. Within minutes, the assault collapsed, and Castle Itter was secured. The battle ended almost as quickly as it had begun, but its significance was enormous. The French prisoners were safe. The castle was liberated. Lieutenant Jack Lee and his small group of defenders had held out long enough for reinforcements to arrive, despite overwhelming odds. When the smoke cleared, the defenders walked among broken stone, spent shell casings, and the wrecked hull of the Sherman tank that had taken the brunt of the early assault. The aftermath of the battle brought recognition for those who had risked everything. Lieutenant Jack Lee received the Distinguished Service Cross for his bold leadership. Survivors remembered the courage of the German Wehrmacht soldiers, especially Major Joseph Gangl, who died protecting the people he once served under a hateful regime. The French prisoners, once fearing certain execution, walked out of the castle alive because of the combined efforts of Americans, Germans, Austrians, and even their own determination to fight. Castle Itter became a footnote in history, overshadowed by the massive events unfolding across Europe as the war finally ended. Yet the battle remains one of the most unusual and inspiring stories of the entire conflict. In the final days of a brutal war, former enemies united against a common threat, proving that courage, loyalty, and humanity could still surface in the darkest of times. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed learning something new today, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you thought of this story.